There is a biological failsafe in the human body so terrifying, it was once classified by the US government. It's not a myth or a ghost story. It's a documented physiological reflex, buried deep within our most primal wiring. When triggered, it doesn't just make your heart race, it initiates a full system shutdown, a surrender command issued from the brainstem itself. The air in the room where they first measured it was said to carry the sharp, metallic scent of ozone and cold sweat, and the sound witnesses described it not as a scream, but as a wet, guttural cessation, the sound of a human being simply switching off. This is the story of the lethal cataplexy protocol, a hidden trigger, and the lone park ranger who discovered it the hard way, 2,000 feet above the ground, with nothing but empty air beneath him. The silence was deafening, broken only by the wet crunch of his own impact. A primal dread took hold as his vision swam, the scent of iron and damp earth filling his nostrils. Every ragged gasp was agony, the cold, sticky ground clinging to his shattered form. Then came the whisper of an impossible thought, scratching at the edges of his consciousness. The idyllic Ohio evening settles over John and Sarah Miller, their backyard filled with laughter, the scent of grilling meat, and their children's playful shrieks. It's a perfect suburban snapshot, the kind that feels both eternal and fragile. The warm air carries the familiar smells of charcoal and cut grass. But in the fading light, shadows begin to stretch just a little too long. John and Sarah lived a predictable life. Mortgage payments, 2 children, and their loyal golden retriever buddy. John crunched numbers as a data analyst, while Sarah shaped young minds as a teacher. Their most daring escape was the occasional weekend camping trip, until John decided to surprise his brother Mike for his 40th birthday. That decision would unravel everything they knew. The ordinary world they'd built began to fray at the edges. What started as a simple birthday surprise would become their descent into something primal and terrifying. Mike was an adrenaline junkie, but John was a different story. A subtle tension tightened John's smile, the paper feeling slick with sweat in his grip. The scent of ozone, like the air before a storm, seemed to cling to the gift. For John, this wasn't an adventure. It was an invitation to a primal dread he couldn't name. But for family, he'd confront his deepest fear. So on a crisp Saturday morning, he drove to the desolate rural airfield. The plane was a weathered Cessna 182, its aluminum skin dull and pitted. His instructor, Chuck, greeted him with forced joviality. A man with 5,000 jumps, whose eyes held a strange, weary distance. The air carried the scent of aviation fuel and damp earth, and a heavy stillness settled around them. Routine, until 10,000 feet. When routine ended, the air grew heavy with metallic scent, like ozone after a storm. A low-frequency hum vibrated through the fuselage, making the floor plates tremble. Through that open doorway, only darkness stared back, a void where sky should have been. The deafening engine roar filled the cramped cabin, as John, his face pale but determined, gave a final thumbs up to Chuck. They shuffled together toward the open door, the frigid wind already clawing at their suits. The jump was supposed to be a tandem, John attached to Chuck. At the very edge of the world, a frayed strap, a 1 in a million manufacturing flaw snapped. The sound cut out completely, plunging everything into a vacuum of noise. In that suspended moment, John's harness went slack, the nylon webbing pooling like a dead snake around his waist. The air grew thick with ozone and the cold, metallic scent of sheer altitude. Chuck's grin dissolved into a silent, gaping horror. John was yanked backward not by any cord, but by the sky's violent vacuum. He tumbled upward, a silent silhouette against the vast, indifferent blue. For the first 2,000 feet, no scream escaped him. His mind simply refused to accept the impossible. This wasn't falling. This was the universe relinquishing its grip. Then, the primal core of his consciousness ignited. Survive. His world dissolved into a violent collage, the earth spiraling, the sun searing his vision, the aircraft shrinking into a silent speck. He'd seen a documentary once, a World War II pilot who fell miles without a parachute and survived, cushioned by pine boughs and deep snow. But below, John stretched only Ohio farmland, endless, flat, and brutally hard. The air grew thin and sharp, carrying the scent of upturned earth and distant rain. Every heartbeat hammered a final, unforgiving truth against his ribs. Then it surfaced in his mind. A strange article about body position. He stopped thrashing against the board. He extended his arms and legs, arching his back into a spread eagle. The air grew heavy and cold against his skin as he held the position. Arrows traced his drag, terminal velocity bleeding from 120 miles per hour to a gut-wrenching 100. He fought to stabilize, fixing his sights on a distant, shimmering pond. But at 5,000 feet, the truth was absolute. The earth was a concrete wall, accelerating toward him. In that crystalline moment of clarity, a monstrous, instinctual idea took root. Not to cushion the fall, but to fight the very atmosphere itself. With a scream stolen by the gale, John performed the impossible. He folded himself into a tight ball, arms locked around his knees, every muscle screaming in protest. Then, with his last shred of will, he hurled his body backward, forcing his spine into a grotesque, impossible arc against the sky's relentless pull. The sound was wet and deep, like a tree trunk splintering underwater. John's body convulsed violently as the sickening crack echoed through the room. That wasn't the snap of a single bone. It was the shattering of his entire rib cage. The air grew thick, the scent of copper and ozone as his body went limp. Multiple ribs on both sides fractured from the immense torque and pressure, detaching from his sternum and splaying outwards like the broken struts of an umbrella. The deformed basket of his torso created a crude, concave bowl beneath his skin and muscle. A baffled surgeon would later describe it in his medical report as a traumatic, pseudo-flail chest cavity. In that moment, it was a biological Hail Mary. The deformed structure caught the air in a desperate, unnatural act of survival. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't a glide. It was a violent, shuddering break. His spin became a sickening, oscillating drop. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and hot metal. A primal dread took hold as the world dissolved into a chaotic, plummeting roar. The ground surged toward him, a plowed field blurring into dark furrows. The wind's howl sharpened into a deafening roar, drowning all other sound. He struck at 50 miles per hour, the impact shuddering through his bones. A sudden, heavy silence followed, broken only by the scent of upturned soil, not the 120 of a freefall. The difference between annihilation and mere devastation. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and wet earth. Then came the sound, a colossal, damp thud that vibrated through bone. The impact left a sticky chill clinging to the skin. Then silence, broken by the distant cawing of crows. Weeks later, in a sterile hospital room, John Miller lay as a fractured mosaic of plaster casts, medical tubing, and fading bruises. Sarah held his hand, her own face now a permanent mask, where profound relief was etched alongside deep-seated trauma. Against all odds, John Miller survived. His legs were shattered, his spine compressed, his liver lacerated, but his heart kept beating. A coppery scent of blood filled the damp air, mingling with the earthy smell of wet soil. His fingers traced the cold, sticky ground beneath him. From the darkness came a faint, scratching sound, like claws dragging across stone. The air grew heavy, thick with a primal dread that seized his lungs. Paralyzed by the unknown, he could only listen as the whisper of movement grew closer. Every ragged breath felt like his last. The paramedics found him in that muddy furrow, utterly bewildered by what lay before them. His body was folded, not broken in the usual sense, but contorted, as if wrapped around an invisible cord. The air carried the thick scent of wet earth and something else, a sharp, metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. And then the x-ray came back, revealing the true horror hidden within that impossible nose. The ribcage was a catastrophic jigsaw of splintered bone and tissue. It was the head trauma surgeon who assembled the grim truth from these fragments. The fracture pattern defied simple impact. These were spiral fractures, evidence of immense rotational force. The ribs hadn't just broken, they had exploded outward from within. In those final seconds of descent, John's subconscious performed a macabre act of self-engineering. He used his own skeleton as a makeshift drag chute, bones grinding against each other with sickening friction. Months later, back home, the memory clung to him like damp clothing. He walked with a severe limp, each step a whispered reminder of that terrible bargain with physics. He attempted to toss the ball to his son, but a simple twist of his torso drained the color from his face, forcing him to stop. His fingers instinctively found his side, tracing the unyielding cage of bone and metal that now lived beneath his skin. To medical science, he is a walking miracle. To his own mind, he is a phantom, perpetually haunted by the vessel that carries him. He does not dream of falling. His nightmares are far more intimate and silent. He dreams of the creep. That instant, he chose to break himself in midair. Every breath rasps with the memory. Every twinge in his side echoes that brutal, desperate ingenuity. The air in his room tastes of stale fear and old pain. John stood at the backyard window, his family's warmth just beyond the glass. In the reflection, the ghostly diagram of his splayed ribcage superimposed over his form. The air carried the faint, coppery scent of ozone, a static prelude to the profound question hanging in the quiet. So what is the will to live? Is it a fire in the soul? Or the last ember refusing the damp? Or is it something more primal, more visceral? Could a mind, in its final moment, gaze upon the very architecture that binds it and command, shatter, so I may remain intact? John's body is his monument, a living testament, a breathing monument to the terrifying, beautiful extremes we harbor within. He didn't just survive a fall. He negotiated with gravity, using his own bones as bargaining chips. The air thickened with the scent of iron and damp earth as his body made its grim compromises. Every crack and snap echoed through the stillness, a whispered negotiation between life and physics. What would your body be willing to break to keep you alive?
If the veil stirred, subscribe and meet the next encounter.